this is ZOZO Shiozaki speaking, and today's presentations titles Original Sin and the Current Situation of ZOZOTOWN's Data Infrastructure. I hope my topic for this presentation is clear enough. And furthermore, I have to make my presentation in English. I'll try my best to make my presentation as clear as possible. Let me just introduce myself. I belong to ZOZO's data platform section under technology division. I'm a team leader there. And let me share my background. After I graduated from college, I joined a venture company with an employee size of 20 to 30 called Vasily. And since that company was acquired by ZOZO, now I work at ZOZO. Right after our company was acquired, my boss called me up in his office and to deploy the data infrastructure on GCP. And that really changed my life, and now I am developing and operating data infrastructure. Before, we used to develop I was coding web API on Ruby on Rails. I was doing back-end engineer. So I was closer to the back application, but back then, the guys who was in charge of infrastructure, who was transferred to another department, left this big message that you should be able to handle infrastructure, and all of a sudden, now I'm in charge of infrastructure again. And the picture on the left, it has some strange mask processing, mosaic processing over my face. But if you could please search under ZOZO Shiozaki, then you'll be able to see my face clearly.
So I'd like to getting back the main talk. This is the agenda I will cover. So first, I will cover the introduction of ZOZOTOWN's data infrastructure. Then the main title of this presentation related about the original sin and the current situation. So this is something like a pan in Japanese. And how we perform the atonement for the original sin. I will touch upon it next. And in the last part, I'd like to highlight the lessons and the summary. So this section introduced the part of ZOZOTOWN's data infrastructure, and most of the data will be in the SQL server as in its database, and therefore once a day it will be transferred to query. So BigQuery is utilized. GCP dedicated line data flow will be used, and once a day all the data will be loaded into BigQuery. And the Cloud Composer is used for workflow orchestration of the entire transfer of the process. And initially, the batch transfer process ran once a day. But in the actually there are more users using ML, so once a day transfer includes all outdated data which is not useful for users. That's one challenge. So in case of recommendation and search, if the product data is outdated, we provide out of the stock data to the users. User will be disappointed. So in order to find a solution, we decided to deploy the real-time the data updating system. So how we will be extracted the differentiated data is a key point. So if there will be a frequent updating of all the data, there will be overriding situation. So CDC is the only the system utilizing pinpoint the relevant data. So the reading of the CDC we utilize a full end. And for the plugin, there was no plugin. So we developed a plugin and utilize it for readout of the data. So friend D, it's usually run as a side, but in this case, friend D is a main container, which is unique. And after the readout, there is the data will be handed over to the cloud path, and also on a real-time basis, it will be incorporated in the big query. So in this manner, the CDC data in big query, and in the previous slide, I showed you database or all the data in a good sense will be merged on a big query. Real time composition of the data will be conducted as make sure the data will be the same as a SQL server. So what's the size of the data infrastructure? All the data in volume, I don't have specifics, but on a high level, hundreds of terabytes is the data volume, and the number of tables is actually millions of tables, and rows, the trillions of rows. So this might be something like a bragging, but actually this represents a huge data volume. So this data infrastructure is one of the largest in Japan. And also talking about the users, how many users we got? So there are many employees using the service. This graph represents the number of users per month executed the query on BigQuery. So this is something like a monthly active user or MAU. Initially, there were a few far right back in 2014 or 18, it's fewer, but the number has been growing. So right now, between 500 and 600 users per month use the service. So in case of the total number of employees, there is a significant percentage of the employees are using it. So this is the essential data infrastructure for ZOZOTOWN. So far, I have covered the current situation with ZOZOTOWN, what's happening there. But initial the development stage, we had a very different picture. So I'd like to cover from now on the original thing and the current situation. We conducted a modification, which is related to the title. And what exactly is the definition of the original thing? So in this presentation, so there were some mistakes we made at the beginning of the system construction that defined the original thing. Our data infrastructure has now grown to be a large scale, but in the beginning it was a very small scale. So we started building our data infrastructure in GCP around in April or May 2018. So we had early mistakes then. So the intent of this presentation is that to make sure it will not be repeated. This is the architecture of the very beginning, early days of this data infrastructure. I will not go into the details, but I'd like you to pay attention to following items. So actually, AWS and GCP, two clouds were used. Now we got only GCP, but initially we used the two clouds. And also the number of arrows indicating copies. There are many arrows, which means that there were copying after copying from the one SQL server to another, then again copying it further to S3, finally loading it to BigQuery. This configuration was complex, frankly speaking, so it was hard to operate the system. Why we ended up with this kind of configuration? This time we'd like to go into why we had this. So went back to the time before BigQuery. We were collecting data in Redshift. So actually Redshift was utilized in place of current BigQuery. There were challenges. So actually we had lacked the know-how of tuning for the transfer. So for that mixture, I will say this for the owner of Redshift, rather chemistry of Redshift for us was not good. So this pipeline for the Redshift, we tried to make adjustment and tried to extract the data from there. Now we got this kind of a graph right now, but in my mind, situation was very complicated. We understood S3, but for the upper part, SQL Server, yes, we recognize that the presence of the SQL Server. However, we were not expert on that, and furthermore, upper downstream, and this is an unexplored territory for us. So under these circumstances, our team, there were some original things. Let me talk about what they were. Actually, we tried to capture and acquire data from S3, which was easy place to acquire data. So in hindsight, we regret that we should have had the courage to venture into the unknown territory for us. That was the SQL Server. So actually, we committed to such original thing, and there were many difficulties onto us. I will highlight three major ones, and there were many more. So first was the deterioration of the data quality. Unintended conversions occurred sometimes during repeated copying. For example, when outputting a file in CSV format, characters that were prone to formatting errors, including commas and line breaks, were somehow deleted or replaced with other characters.
And in SQL server size, the deletion physically, whether it was reflected on BigQuery side, that really depended on table. Some table, yes, transfer success. On others, although the data was physically deleted, still remained. So it made things a lot more complicated. Another difficulty is an increase of the transfer time. Transfer should be a simple one. Once execution should be enough. But because we were transferring many times, the processing time increased significantly. And the long lead time to bring the system back during the failure, because the operation was extremely complicated. And the intermediate system in the data pipeline was managed by different teams. So that also made things difficult too. And the third is increase in the lead time when adding a new table on the data infrastructure. As I mentioned, there's an intermediate team who was another team, not our team. Therefore, on the data infrastructure, when there's a request to add new data, that had to be handled by multiple teams. Specifically speaking, just to add one table can take as long as, for some reason or the other, 2 weeks. And that alone, all these difficulties made ZOZOTOWN's data usage more difficult than should be. So when I look back now, why did we choose this technology with all these challenges back then? Back then, there was a not clear direction on whether we really need a data infrastructure, which is essential right now in ZOZOTOWN, but back then it wasn't clear. So the resources was not enough to develop and manage data infrastructure. And furthermore, there were not enough expertise within our company to develop data infrastructure. I used to be the back-end engineer making web API with Ruby on Rails. So I had no experience in data infrastructure. And so this is really my first time And back then, there weren't too many literatures about building data infrastructure. And today, when I go to any big bookstores, there are many books about it and also many information available on internet. Back then, those were hard to come by. So that also made things difficult. And last reason is we tend to trust in so-called self-proclaimed copy. When I listen to the professional of data, for those who have made a copy from the original data, how valid is this copy? And they said it's fine, it's valid, it's good ones. But that the perfect copy of data is perfect only within their own application, their own usage for their business. So people have a different understanding of so-called perfect copy. So we tend to rely too much on self-proclaimed copy, which led to the deterioration of the quality of the data. In the end, everybody was lying, but we can't point fingers to anybody. It was an organization issue. So when I look back now, I don't mean to make excuses, but I think this probably was a rational decision making. I like to believe so. So if my presentation ends here, then it will sound like I'm making excuses for the mistakes that we made. But now I would like to talk about how we have recovered, overcame these difficulties. The first thing that we worked on, the migration of data transfer batch. And from this point on was we start to develop enough expertise related to GCPs. So we knew that already what are the key points that we need to make sure we cover when creating the data transfer batch. If this was a game, RPG, it's as if we are, moving up in the players' levels so that we are stronger in this big RPG game. But we did create something new as well instead of just carrying over what we have experienced in the past. We had to first change the architecture, which used to be ETL to more ELT. We have changed the order of transfer and load and tried to make the transfer within the big query. So we store the unprocessed data within BigQuery. Then afterwards, we were able to use enough computing resource to make any conversion within BigQuery. Another thing that we tried here is to redesign our security. In the beginning, personal information we were going to null or we were going to hash and anonymize. That's how we stored, because that is a very sensitive data. We didn't want to make copies of such sensitive data in very different places. It was a very important practice. But there are some cases where we need to access raw personal data, such as email dispatching, DMs. Email addresses can be a part of a personal communication, and when developing email dispatching system, DM system, and if those email addresses are nil or anonymized, it's useless. So for those information, we had to give authority to access the raw personal information in a very focused manner. But for others, we restricted such access. So we created such security measures. So creating data transfer batch, we had no problem with migration. The challenge we face was data aggregation processing migration. So data that we read from database, we put it in the BigQuery, then we pass it on to other teams to do the data aggregation and do their work.
This migration was very difficult, to say the least. What we did first was to create a new comparison table, a new environment versus an old environment. Then we confirmed the deltas between the data, one table at a time. Then we dug in to the reason why, if there were any deltas. We had to work on multiple hundreds of table worth of data, and we share that information with the stakeholders, appropriate teams. And in some of the tables, because of the deltas between new and old environment, at that time, we consider the right data is on the core database, which is in the above layer. Then we carried on with the migration. Then the mysterious, so-called mysterious conversion processes that we used to do in the old environment, we don't have to do anymore. So we just cut off that tie. Then at that time, we already had many users, many departments who had access to it, and it was quite difficult for us to know the exact impact to this issues with data table migration, aggregation table, data aggregation, migration. Then, for example, there are some system which the person who developed has left the company already. There was such a batch, and also you don't want to have a system where we cannot track back who has developed it. And for those who had made that system, some of them have forgotten that actually they built that system. I would think that anybody who gave a birth to their children, they should look after their children. That's my thing. But for these issues, our countermeasure is to use audit log. With a big query, there's a table called jobs by organization. And using that, all the queries that was executed within the big query can be recorded 100% in accuracy. So we use that to collect the information to know how much old system is still being used, how many queries still left which needs to be migrated from the old system to the new system. So we had a better visibility of this migration process. And another thing that we did is to find a to prioritize actions. We had visualized this data aggregation process. We found MART, keystone, referenced by many data aggregation processing. On the left-hand side, you see that many of the arrows are merging to the center part, and you could see that that's a key process. And in this prioritization process, there were some data mart without any administrator, and also a dashboard without any administrator. And for those, we did a survey of how this is being used. And in some cases, we had to delete, and in some cases, we had to designate a new administrator.
So in this manner, we less and less referred to older environment and older system with less utilized. And the next step is to delete the table in the old system. So one item we paid a special attention to was that as soon as possible, the ones we can delete should be deleted as soon as possible. Instead of one-off big deletion by table basis, we checked the status of references. On a daily basis, we aggregated the usage, and in a certain period, maybe over a dozen days, in those days, those tables confirmed that there were no differences and predetermined the period. On the day we deleted that information, why we had such a as soon as possible structure. So unwittingly, some users might have utilized the older system. We decided to eliminate it. And if we completely wipe out the older system at one go, then there will be a possible impact. So gradually, we decided to delete the information on the older system. So on a phased basis, deletion was conducted. Thanks to the effort, the last table was deleted. Only our team was happy. But from other teams, they were not aware of such deletion. So that was a very natural process. And this is a very ideal success for the case for the deletion of the older system. Meanwhile, and for certain tables, there was a request to keep some tables in older system. So in another location on another GCA project, we decided to make such table available. And also the privilege to access to the project was limited to certain users. And for other users, they were only given privilege to access a new environment. So with this manner, we made sure that unwitting access to the older information. So far, I have covered atonement, but there were many more actions we took. So those information is available if you search on our tech blog. So I'd like you to take a look at it. And also data infrastructure transition news. Other than those, there are many information. Lastly, I'd like to summarize the learning we had. The first lesson we had is do not believe in self-proclaimed copy. Once you create a copy, without noticing it, information will be getting older. So we needed to regard the data only that guaranteed to be correct as a part of the data infrastructure. What we need to do is that the upstream you go, the cleaner the data there would be. So how to get such data from upstream and upper part? There is a system in charge of that system. We should make a very good friends of that personnel. So in organization-wise, you would pinpoint which teams will be helpful to you. So the second lesson is that do not listen to others, listen to a log, because human beings will be making a mistake or preconceived something wrong information. So only interviewing people is not adequate. So we needed to rely on log, especially audit log. Is highlighting the truth. So we needed to utilize the audit log. So the name of the audit log indicates that we only use for the auditing process, but actually for general operation, you can utilize the audit log too. So the third lesson, final lesson, is do not mix. It would be dangerous. So one symbolic case or terminology to indicate it, there is a spoonful of dirty water. Even if it's a spoonful of water in a keg of wine, then total keg worthful the wine will be getting dirtier. So it's a quotation of Schopenhauer. And so data management, we can say exactly the same thing. So in a data quality management, even if just a single or a tip of the dirty data, everything else will be get fouled or get dirtier. But it's not so simple to just make sure that everything will be clean. But there could be some ad hoc related data. You might need it in some cases. But the major point is that you should differentiate clean data from other data, not clean data. And it should be made sure that there will be such a distinguishment. Otherwise, all the data might be getting dirtier. last summary, so current data infrastructure has grown to be a very good data infrastructure essential for ZOZO Town. However, we had the original thing in the initial part of the building of the data infrastructure. That is a mistake that we had extracted data wherever possible to easier to extract that original thing. In order to atone in the such a thing, we took years to rid of the original thing. So those who are planning to build a data infrastructure, I would like you to avoid the same mistake we committed. That's it for me. Thank you very much.
塩崎さん、ありがとう。
Mr. Shiozaki, thank you very much. And we are going to invite the interviewer, and I'd like to have a deep dive for the points. And also we are incorporating the questions from the audience too. If you have any questions, you can post your question from the bottom right of the question mark symbol. So please do submit your questions. Interviewer is Mr. Kiyoyuki Horikawa, Line. Could you introduce yourself, Horikawa-san? Thank you. As an interviewer, so far, the Line, I was a user for the data infrastructure and supporting the data building. And from the total line structure, I'd like to ask some questions. And thank you. Thank you. So, Mr. Horikawa, after listening to the presentation, do you have any items you are interested in? Thank you very much, Shiozaki-san. And also original thing and how you conducted atonement. And that was a very precious information for those who are involved in the data infrastructure, because our time in life would be very limited. So one item first, I'd like to confirm with you, in your organization is ML technology division ML, data department. So your users are the ML engineers or?
And so the question is your customers for the entire company is only for the ML team? My customer would be the ZOZO's entire staffs, and some of them are ML engineers. I see. That makes sense. Okay, thank you very much. So I understand that you have responsibility to deliver quality service to all the staffs. My next question, when I was listening to your presentation, I came up with two questions. The first question is regarding something related to original sin. You started working from where it was easy. You started capturing data from where it was easy. And in the atonement sections, you talk about the data comparisons. At that time when you're working on it, the data matching versus a CON system, was that something that you were able to do? Well, with the comparison against the infrastructure core DB, is that what you mean? Yes, that's also another sense, because we trusted a self-claimed copy, and they look the same, the data that came to our big data, but in details they were not the perfect match, and we didn't make that confirmation back then. So we skipped that important confirmation phase. Then we started working on BI work, like creating a dashboard, and that's something that we should not have done on a hindsight. I see. Yes, I do have a similar experience too. It makes sense. And toward the end, you were talking about I've also made many mistakes too. But when trying to recover, to, toward the end, you were saying about you should try to be friendly with the users for those who are in the upper streams. You mentioned. I think that makes a lot of sense because data infrastructure people and the development application development people, them not working in synchronization, maybe that is more of an issues. What do you think about that? How can we overcome that? Yes, I think you have a point. Yes, on the surface level, it looks like we started working from what was easy, but when you dig in deeper, I think the issue was we were looking at those who were analyzing data. That to us was our customers in the beginning. Let me explain about our organization. The team that was developing data infrastructure, they were the relatively short staff from a small venture company. Then for those who were protector of ZOZO data infrastructure database, all of a sudden the newcomers came in and then they were asked to release, make their database open to the newcomers. And us being the newcomer, I think we failed to develop good communication with them. I think that's probably was another reason why we had difficulty in the beginning. I see. Yes, that makes sense. If I was in your shoes, I can see myself that they're doing a very similar mistakes as well. You talked about in the beginning data analysis infrastructure MAU. You had a graph on that, and I could see that the numbers increase significantly. The MAU is this one? Yes. Why? All of a sudden, around the 2020 timing, why do you see so much users using this data infrastructure? MAU, monthly active users. Is that because of more company joined in the company? Yes, one of the reasons that because I think around that time ZOZOTOWN was expanding. We had more people and stuff, but also that's not the only reason. The system for the data infrastructure in the beginning was to create analytics reports, BI, through dashboard visualizing. It was used as creating reports for executives. But from 2020, we started deploying machine learnings. We were finding use cases besides just to create analytics report. So we had more application, more uses for our data. I see. I also overseeing data infrastructure. It makes our jobs more difficult. But also it makes our jobs more worthwhile too, isn't it? Yes, of course. We're happy that more people are using our database, but all of a sudden we are getting some inquiries such as how can I make this a big query, how can I use big query. It feels like this data infrastructure became a very big buzzword amongst the companies, and just ask Shiozaki-san and to know how to use this and get the value out of our data. And I remember I was getting extremely busy from that time. It was a really, I was quite honored, but that was the situation. I see. So that was a good time, yes. So my another question was so the conversion process and data sets you migrated from one environment to the other and confirm the conversion process, and you are making the data matching from the past and old and see the delta. And my question is, from the user, it was probably difficult to know what kind of work that you were doing as a person who was, maintaining data infrastructure, and that I wonder whether you were under pressure from executives, or how did you motivate yourself doing it? It's such a background work that people don't really notice all these efforts that you were putting in, and it wasn't really visible. Well, regarding my motivation, it's really the sense of mission. It's a mistakes that I felt that our team has caused, and I thought that I had to fix it myself. Really, I was on and regarding my team members' impact to this work. Our team, I mean, we share the same mission, so same aspiration. So it made sense for us to keep on working, diligently day by day to correct what was wrong, little by little. I think we were really working as one team, and everybody was aligned in this direction. That's great. That's great. I mean, I'm sure you are a great leader in providing reason for people to work. For how about any pressure from your management, your executives? Well, because we fix this our data infrastructure, does that brings the income revenue stream into our companies? Definitely not. It's just to fix our mistakes we made. We weren't just working on this, but also we were developing new function sets. We were also adding more data linkage, and also we were managing and operating data infrastructure at the same time. So we had other concurrent jobs. So of course, this was about the maintenance and operation and fixing the mistakes that we made, but we were also working on other projects to bring in more revenue into the company. I see. So for those activities that you were doing, while you were fixing this data infrastructure, my question is, what kind of deliverables that you have to provide to your managers? Were you in agreement with your managers about your project direction and scope and deliverables, the balance act between the projects to bring in revenue versus the maintenance? We have to make the most out of our allocated times, because I would think that if you're working on more defensive work all the time, then I thought that you'll be faced with all the scrutinies by your management. But it makes sense, because your data infrastructure team, the data platform section team people were also developing new functions. I mean, that makes sense. I was listening to what you're saying. That's something I was thinking. That's something that we should be doing too. Yes. Our company has a great understanding for the needs of a type of work that we have, which may not be so flashy, but it's very essential. I see. That makes sense.